Hello, dear viewers of my video. I hope you enjoy watching it and look forward to your feedback in the comments. I was sitting in a corner booth of my favorite cafe, the kind with chipped teacups and jazz on loop, when it happened. The message came from a friend still inside. Evelyn, everything's down, servers, payroll, internal dashboards, even the building keycards. What the hell did you do? I didn't answer. I just stared into my lukewarm latte and waited. At exactly 8:03 a.m. on a Monday morning, Marotech, the same company I had given nearly a decade of my life to, came to a dead halt. Not a slowdown, a collapse. Like a computer you forgot to save before a power outage. Just poof. Gone. And they never saw it coming. My name is Evelyn. I'm 32 years old, and I used to be the system administrator at Marotech. Used to be, because 3 days ago, I was fired without so much as a conversation. They handed me a folder, told me my badge had been deactivated, and that someone from IT would escort me out. Someone from IT. I was IT. What they didn't realize, what their shiny new management refused to learn, is that I wasn't just the person who reset passwords and cleared printer queues. I built the entire back end of their infrastructure. From scratch. Every server they ran on, every database they queried, every firewall they thought was protecting them, I put it there. Me, Evelyn. Not the sleek consultants in fitted blazers who showed up with buzzwords and flowcharts. Not the junior admins who still used sticky notes for credentials. They fired me because I refused to work weekends, for free. Let that sink in. It started small. First, a Slack message on a Saturday morning. Hey Evelyn, could you just reboot the node cluster? We've got some devs pushing last-minute code. I did it, no big deal. Then the messages came more often. Restart this, update that, migrate those tables. Always on a weekend, always unpaid. And every time, I told myself it was just temporary, that they needed me, that someone would notice. They did notice, but not in the way I hoped. It wasn't long before I became the ghost in the system. Reliable, silent, invisible. And when the new management came in with their Ivy League resumes and digital transformation initiatives, they didn't see me. They saw a salary line and a chance to cut costs. The irony is that I probably would have stayed, even with the weekends, if someone had just acknowledged what I was doing. But they didn't. Instead, they sent an email. We're restructuring, it said. Thank you for your service. Just like that. So I walked out with nothing, not even a goodbye. And yet, I didn't leave empty-handed. You see, while they were busy renaming departments and flattening org charts, they never bothered to ask who maintained the master credentials, who wrote the custom scripts that tied everything together, who had root access not just to the servers, but to the logic behind how those servers talked to each other. They never asked because they didn't think it mattered. They thought they could replace me. They were wrong. Now, as I sit in this cafe with my laptop open and no one around me realizing what just happened downtown, I can't help but think back to when it all started unraveling. There was a time, maybe 4 years ago, when Marotech was different. We were scrappy, tight-knit, and fueled by purpose. We believed in the work. We believed in each other. But then came the acquisition. A venture group swept in like saviors, promising to scale and modernize. They brought in new leadership, slick, efficient, sterile. People who measured productivity in pivot tables and engagement metrics. People who didn't know the difference between a cron job and a compile error. The first thing they did was kill flexibility. No more cross-functional Fridays. No more autonomy. Creativity died in endless Zoom calls titled Value Alignment. Then they started pushing unpaid hours as team dedication. And finally, they came for the soul of the company, the people who built it. I was one of the last to go. And now, as the city wakes up and I sip what's left of my coffee, I wonder how long it'll take before they realize that I wasn't just a cog. I was the keystone, and without me, the whole thing was always destined to fall. I can pinpoint the moment the company started to rot. It wasn't a server crash, or a blown deployment, or even one of Johnny's notoriously bad motivational speeches. It was the first time I shook Roger Winslow's hand. There was something sterile about it. His grip was too firm, his smile too rehearsed. Like someone who'd been trained to seem likable by someone who didn't know what likable actually looked like. He wore a steel gray suit that probably cost more than my entire yearly wardrobe. His watch glinted like a threat, and when he walked into the company for the first time, he didn't ask for a tour. He asked for a ledger. Roger Winslow, Merotech's new financial director, MBA from somewhere expensive, a resume filled with turnaround stories, and the personality of a man who'd never written a single line of code in his life. According to the press release, he was brought in to modernize our fiscal footprint and streamline legacy resource channels, which, in normal human speak, meant cut benefits, shrink teams, and replace real workers with buzzwords and slideshows. We didn't even get a proper introduction, just a company-wide email that started with "exciting times ahead" and ended with "please join me in welcoming Roger." The first signs were small. The free therapy sessions we'd fought for during the pandemic? Gone. Health insurance premiums crept higher. Our beloved office espresso machine disappeared overnight. We got a memo about reducing unnecessary comforts and fostering self-sufficient productivity. But it didn't stop there. 2 weeks after Roger arrived, a spreadsheet leaked. One column listed personnel cost optimization targets. My team was listed. Not by name, but by function. Infrastructure team. 3 headcount. That was my team. We'd already been lean, running a full enterprise backend with 4 core engineers, and a few juniors we were still mentoring. There was nothing to cut. Every reduction was a risk. But Roger didn't see humans. He saw equations. Then came Johnny. Johnny looked like someone who had walked off a startup recruitment poster. Glossy hair, gleaming smile, that impossible blend of casual arrogance and empty charisma. He introduced himself in our Monday sync with a speech that should have come with sound effects. "I'm here to shake things up," he said, sliding into the conference room like he owned it. "We're building the future, and that means no more old-school bottlenecks. We move fast. We break things. We innovate." He clapped his hands once, loudly, like we were supposed to cheer. Nobody did. Johnny had no technical background. None. He bragged about outsourcing his understanding of code, and once told me, "Details are for execution teams." But Roger loved him, said he was vision-aligned, said he spoke business fluently. Johnny was assigned as my team's new efficiency lead. He started by renaming our systems in the documentation, then deleting sections he didn't understand. Said they were too complex. He replaced precise architecture diagrams with pastel-colored flowcharts and demanded we simplify our commit messages for executive readability. And still, I tried to be patient. I scheduled meetings. I explained dependencies. I walked him through how critical it was that our firewall configurations weren't changed without protocol. He nodded politely. Then he emailed the junior sysadmin to just open port 3011 for convenience. Convenience. By the 3rd week, Johnny was actively sabotaging the team. He questioned every time estimate, called our engineers overcautious, and began forwarding our tickets to outsourced contractors he had hired through a discount platform. He was building an empire of chaos, and Roger applauded him. During a quarterly update, Roger praised the new energy in our department. He said Johnny's restructuring had cut operational costs by 22%. What he didn't say was that systems were breaking weekly, that we'd lost 2 engineers in 1 month, that people were burnt out, scared, and angry. But none of that showed up on his damn spreadsheets. Meanwhile, I was running triage 24/7, writing secret backups, encrypting rollback plans, slipping security patches into shell scripts I disguised as miscellaneous updates. I was building lifeboats in a ship Roger was drilling holes in, while Johnny danced on the deck. I tried to protect my people. When Amina was reprimanded for halting a deployment due to a permissions exploit, I walked into HR myself. When Malik was demoted for pushing back on a cloud migration that would have exposed client data, I sat in his exit interview and made sure his departure note was filed correctly. But I could only do so much. I was spending more time defending my team from management than from actual cyber threats. I knew every risk. I knew how fragile our system had become under this new regime of ambition and ignorance. But they wouldn't listen. Johnny even suggested we move everything to a new platform he saw at a TED conference. He couldn't even pronounce Kubernetes correctly. One day, after yet another 3-hour meeting filled with jargon and zero substance, I found myself in the server room. It was quiet there, cold, humming, stable. Unlike the rest of the company, I sat on the floor, leaned against the cabinet where the core backup node lived, and I cried. Not because I was scared, not because I was overwhelmed, because I finally knew how this would end. They would fire me, not because I failed, but because I wouldn't let them fail without a fight. And when they did, they'd think they were safe. They'd assume the system could run without me. They'd assume all the complexity could be transferred, all the protections were in the manuals, all the logic could be simplified into bullet points. But it couldn't. Because I wasn't just a sysadmin. I was the architect. And no one builds a cathedral with Legos and gets away with it. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't arrive with shouting matches or slammed doors. It creeps in quietly, like a whisper just loud enough for everyone to hear, but soft enough to deny. That whisper, in my case, was named Mari. She joined the company about a year ago, fresh out of a cybersecurity boot camp, sharp in that academic, eager to prove herself way. At first, I liked her. She was curious, always asking smart questions, genuinely excited about back-end security protocols. I mentored her, gave her access to my sandbox scripts, walked her through the architecture I had spent years refining. She used to call me a genius. Used to, but things change when the air turns political. Mari was smart, but not just in code. She knew how to read a room, and when Johnny arrived, flinging charisma and chaos like confetti, she adjusted faster than any of us. She started complimenting him in meetings, laughing at his jokes, suggesting we try some of the modern startup strategies she'd heard about. At first, it was harmless, annoying, but harmless. Then came the suggestions. "Well, Evelyn's code is just really complex, you know?" she said once, smiling sweetly as if she hadn't just set off a bomb. "Maybe too complex? I mean, if anything happened to her, would anyone else even understand it?" She said it during a team sync, right in front of Johnny. He laughed. "Exactly what I've been saying. We need more transparency." No one defended me. I didn't respond. I just sat there, face neutral, pulse steady, like I hadn't felt the knife slide in. Because if I'd reacted, it would have confirmed exactly what they were hinting at. Evelyn is defensive. Evelyn is controlling. Evelyn is the problem. It wasn't long before I started being left out of meetings. Mari, now Johnny's unofficial right hand, began sending recaps of decisions I wasn't part of. Updates were implemented without my sign-off. One day, I logged in and found that someone had tried to rewrite a permission sequence I'd buried deep in the system core. They broke it, of course. Took down 2 internal dashboards. Mari called it a learning experiment. Johnny called it empowerment. I called it what it was, sabotage. But I didn't explode. I didn't report her. I didn't give them what they were clearly baiting for. I kept working, even when the hours stretched into weekends. Even when my Slack pinged at 2 a.m. with urgent requests for things I'd already documented. Even when they removed my admin override access for accountability. I stayed. Because despite everything, I loved that system. Not because it was mine, but because it worked. Because it protected people's data, ensured compliance, kept our infrastructure solid even when the people running it weren't. It was elegant, efficient, and battle-tested, and no one else understood how fragile it had become under all the tinkering. Every day, I watched Mari rise, smiling, nodding, agreeing with Johnny's every impulsive move. She was positioning herself as the future, and I was being framed as the past. The worst part? She was good. Not great, but good enough. just enough to be convincing when she said things like, "We could probably simplify Evelyn's protocols, right?" Or, "I've got a friend at a startup who says monoliths are dead." But she hadn't been there during the DDoS flood of 2020. She hadn't patched our mail servers during the zero-day bug that wiped out half the East Coast's uptime. She hadn't built the triple-layered authentication shell that protected our financial APIs from a breach last March. I had, and they were treating me like a relic. The pressure mounted. 12-hour days became standard. Weekend work was now part of the culture. Every ticket was marked high priority. Every mistake was scrutinized, especially mine. I remember one morning standing in the server room, my sanctuary, staring at the blinking lights, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were shaking. I hadn't slept in 30 hours. But the system was still running, because I was still running. And somehow, despite everything, the isolation, the whispers, the backdoor maneuvering, I kept going. Not because they deserved it, but because I did. Because I wouldn't let their incompetence undo something I had built with integrity. Because I wouldn't let a girl with a talent for flattery and a man with no technical compass take down a decade of hard work. So I stayed quiet. I documented everything, every change, every permission shift, every new login credential Johnny didn't understand but insisted on using. I encrypted a backup layer they didn't know existed, one that would kick in only under specific triggers. And then I waited. I wasn't just the system's admin anymore. I was its last line of defense. And soon, they'd find out what happens when you push a system too far, isolate the only person who understands it, and assume silence means weakness. The email came in on a Friday at 4:47 p.m. Subject line: Critical System Audit. Immediate action required. I knew it was trouble the second I saw Johnny's name in the sender field and the word urgent in all caps. I opened it with a sigh, already lodged in my chest. Hey team, after a strategic discussion with Roger, we've decided to initiate a full infrastructure audit this weekend to align with Q3 compliance goals. We need full logs, code integrity checks, cloud migration assessments, and updated security schema documentation by Monday 8 a.m. This is a crucial test of agility. Let's prove we're ready. Thanks, Johnny. No mention of overtime, no warning, no plan, just an impossible unpaid demand. I read it 3 times, blinking in disbelief. A full system audit? In 2 days? That would take at least 3 people and a week of prep, if you knew the architecture. And Johnny didn't even know where the main server logs lived. I clicked Reply All. Hi, Johnny. A full audit of our system in the proposed timeframe is technically unfeasible. The process involves sensitive modules and authentication triggers that cannot be safely reviewed without halting core services. Additionally, scheduling a mandatory system-wide operation over the weekend without compensation violates both labor policy and contract agreements. I strongly advise we meet Monday to properly plan this. Evelyn. I hesitated a moment before hitting send. I knew what I was inviting, but I wasn't going to let him bulldoze us into a disaster just to prove a point to Roger. 5 minutes later, Mari responded. Hey Johnny, I'm happy to start on the audit over the weekend if needed. I've got time and would love to pitch in. Let me know how I can help. Marie. Help? She didn't even know where the staging environment forked from the main production shell. The last time she tried to run a security scan, she locked herself out of the test server for 3 hours. But Johnny responded instantly. Love the hustle, Mari! That's the kind of can-do spirit we need. No mention of my warning. No acknowledgement that I'd just explained why the whole thing could crash the system. I could feel the pressure building behind my eyes. That tight, pulsing tension that comes from being ignored and undermined at the same time. I stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the city below. Weekend traffic, couples walking dogs, people heading into their weekends like they had permission to live. And here I was, being asked to rewrite the company's skeleton because a manager who couldn't spell SSH had something to prove. I opened a private drive I hadn't touched in months, and I started documenting. I screenshotted the email thread, logged the timestamps, saved records of previous system warnings I'd sent that had been ignored. I pulled logs from the last time Mari touched a config file and nearly triggered a firewall lockdown. I wrote a timeline, marked every moment of mismanagement, every instance of unpaid labor pushed as team spirit. I wasn't angry. I was ready. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about systems anymore. It was about a company gutting its own brain and expecting the body to keep moving. It was about a culture that rewarded obedience and punished expertise. It was about watching mediocrity thrive under the disguise of loyalty. They wanted an audit. They were going to get one, but not the kind they expected. Sunday morning smelled like fear. Not mine, theirs. I could feel it humming under the surface, like static before a storm. When systems are poorly managed, tension becomes a current, and I'd spent a decade reading systems. They were scared because I said no. After all the overtime, all the can you justs, all the 2 a.m. server restarts, and silent firefighting behind the scenes, I had finally refused. One single, clearly worded email, documented, CC'd, timestamped, and they unraveled faster than our last security patch rollout. So when that email hit my inbox Sunday afternoon, subject line, confidential, performance review scheduled, I didn't even flinch. Evelyn, you are scheduled for a performance review Monday at 9 a.m. in Conference Room B. Attendance is mandatory. Human resources. No salutation, no details, no attachments. Just a blade in a manila envelope. But I'd seen it coming. I'd smelled the rot weeks ago when the benefits started vanishing and Johnny was given more control than sense. When Mari started using just trying to help like a weapon. When Roger started referring to long-tenured staff as legacy liabilities. So I poured myself a black coffee, pulled on a sweater that still smelled faintly like code marathons, and got to work. Step 1. Back up everything. I logged into my private drive, not the company's. Years ago, I'd learned to keep a personal mirror of my work. Not the proprietary code itself, but logs, screenshots, progress reports, meeting notes, evidence of every patch I'd written, every system I'd stabilized, every Friday night I'd spent fixing what someone else broke. I archived the full thread of the audit debacle. Johnny's Friday email, my response, Marie's cloying reply, and Johnny's enthusiastic, love the hustle, response. I saved internal chat logs where I'd raised technical concerns and been ignored. I exported my task completion history for the past 6 months, 97% on-time delivery, 0 critical errors, 3 documented cost-saving initiatives. They wanted a performance review? I was going to give them the whole show. Step 2. Call Ruth. Ruth Adler, tech labor attorney, ferocious advocate, and my personal nuclear option. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice as cool and clipped as ever. Talk to me. I didn't waste time. I laid out the audit demand, the timing, the retaliation, the scheduled meeting, the sudden shift from silent hostility to documented threats. She didn't miss a beat. They're setting you up for a soft termination. Performance-based dismissal is how companies dodge wrongful firing claims. I figured, I said. Good. Here's what we do. First, build the timeline. Every warning you've given, every unpaid request, every violation, label it, date it. Second, print your contract. Highlight your working hours clause and the overtime language. Third, don't go in empty-handed. Bring documentation, physical. When they say performance, ask for specifics. Ask for metrics. Ask for signatures. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Got it. One more thing, she said, her tone dropping an octave. Don't defend yourself. Present facts. Let their narrative break under the weight of your proof. If they push, thank them, ask for a written copy, and walk out. Do not argue. I'm not scared, Ruth. I know you're not, she said, but I want you dangerous. Step 3. Write the truth, not for the court, not for HR, for me. I opened a blank document and titled it, This is what they tried to erase. I wrote about the midnight outages, the time I coded through a fever because a core client had a launch, the holidays I skipped, the promotions I was passed over for. I wrote about the joy of solving problems that no one else even noticed, about building something strong and elegant in a world obsessed with fast and flashy. I wrote about the people who left, the ones who gave up, the ones like me, silent warriors in the background, who believed in the mission even when the mission forgot them. I wrote about dignity and how I refused to surrender mine. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I was anxious, because I was ready. Everything I'd built, the firewalls, the scripts, the triple-layered access triggers, was still standing. I was still standing. And they had no idea how deeply their world depended on my quiet, invisible labor. Let them try to tear it down. Let them think a printed letter in a cold conference room was enough to finish me. They were about to find out what happens when you corner the architect of your entire foundation. The morning air had a strange stillness to it, heavy, like the moment before thunder. I arrived at the building at 7:55 a.m. The streets were still quiet, the city waking up one yawn at a time. I had dressed intentionally, neat blazer, dark jeans, polished boots, calm, poised, unreadable. I didn't come to plead or protest. I came to witness. When I swiped my badge at the glass turnstile, nothing happened. No green light, no click of the lock. Just a small red error message blinking on the screen. Access denied. Behind the security desk, Owen, the guard I'd known for years, stiffened. He looked down at his tablet, hesitated, then slowly stood. "Ms. Lane, his voice faltered. "I've been instructed not to let you in." I said nothing, just looked at him with the quiet weight of 8 years behind my eyes. "I'm really sorry," he added, almost in a whisper. I gave him a small, tired smile. "Don't be. It's not your fault." And I turned around and walked out. I didn't look back. At 8:01 a.m., I sat down at my usual corner table in the cafe across the street. By 8:02, my coffee arrived. Extra shot, no sugar. The barista, Lena, winked and said, "Rough morning?" I didn't answer, just wrapped my hands around the cup. And at 8:03, it began. My phone buzzed once. A system alert from a monitoring script still logged into a private dashboard. Auth, refresh, failed buzz. Another alert. Critical error. Token handshake, timeout, failsafe initiated. I opened my laptop, connected to the secure channel, and watched the system unravel. First, the internal access network began to stutter. The heartbeat signal from the primary biometric node had missed its third check-in window. Then the credential vault locked itself. Session tokens expired across the organization like falling dominoes. Then came the cascade. All administrator panels, locked VPN access, invalid session, payroll system, requires primary key dev environment, sudo override unauthorized client dashboards, service unavailable. The code I had written 3 years ago, quiet, loyal, invisible, was doing exactly what it had been designed to do: protect the company from intrusion. What they didn't realize was that the greatest risk of intrusion wasn't external. It was them. My phone started lighting up. First a ping from Marcus in IT. "Hey Evelyn, did you change something before leaving?" Then from Sandra in compliance. "We've got 200 plus clients locked out. Is this a firewall bug? Please advise." Then Mari. Her message was short, breathless. "Everything's broken. They can't access anything. Did you do this?" I didn't reply. Across the street, I could see the building come alive with panic. People were on phones, running between conference rooms. The CTO, Philip, was standing in the lobby, gesturing furiously to someone on the other end of a call. Johnny stormed into view, looking genuinely confused for the first time in his smug career. I sipped my coffee. They had assumed I could be replaced, that my years of painstaking design, my layered security model, my hard-coded access ethics, could be handed off like a desk lamp and a stapler. But they never asked what would happen if the person who wrote the architecture vanished. They never read the contingency clause I'd built into the core. If biometric confirmation, sees null and en route override. Signed. Lock to them, it was just another line in a config file. To the system, it was a scream. By 8:30, Twitter was lighting up. Clients were posting screenshots of error messages. Private vendor chats were circulating rumors of a data breach. Johnny posted a half-baked statement about unexpected maintenance, which only poured gasoline on the fire. Internal Slack logs were being leaked. Executives were being tagged in Reddit threads. A tech blog posted a headline: Startup darling Merotech suffers major outage hours after firing lead engineer. My inbox, meanwhile, was filling with emails. HR, Roger, Philip. Even the CEO, a man who hadn't spoken directly to me in 2 years. Their messages varied in tone. We'd love to reconnect and explore transition support. There appears to be a configuration issue we'd appreciate your insights on. We may have been premature in our actions and want to discuss reinstatement. The last one made me laugh. Not loudly, just a breath through my nose and a shake of my head. I closed the laptop and watched the world outside my window flicker like a short-circuited display. They thought I was gone. They thought firing me was cleaning up inefficiency. They didn't realize I was the system. Not just the code, not just the uptime, the integrity. They fired me at 8 am. By 8:03, their kingdom was silent. And for the first time in years, I was finally at peace. By noon on Monday, the panic had curdled into desperation. Emails flooded in from every corner of Merotech's collapsing ecosystem. Some frantic, others forced into a brittle politeness. Most came with subject lines like, urgent, immediate assistance requested, or requesting Evelyn Lane's availability. Even Johnny, who once called me outdated infrastructure, had managed to choke out a Slack DM that began with, Hey Evelyn, just looping you in. They were unraveling, and they knew exactly who they needed to fix it. I let them twist for another hour. At precisely 12:15 p.m., I responded. Not with empathy, but with terms. Availability begins at 1 p.m. My rate is $500 per hour, billed in full-day increments. This agreement will be structured as a consulting contract. No employment, no oversight, no ownership transfer of process. All system access granted will be provisional and monitored. No calls outside of session time. If these terms are unacceptable, please consider other options. Evelyn Lane. Within 5 minutes, Roger replied. Terms accepted. We'll have the agreement ready. Please come in. Of course they accepted. They didn't have a choice. I arrived at Merotech at 12:57 p.m. The receptionist barely looked up as I passed. Security didn't even ask for my badge. They just buzzed me through. The place was a mess. People whispering in tense clusters, typing furiously, screens flashing with red error messages. Slack channels were in meltdown. Clients were threatening lawsuits. The office had the strained hush of a hospital waiting room, everyone pretending not to know what was wrong while the life support monitors screamed. When I entered conference room A, every eye turned to me like I was oxygen. Roger stood to greet me. Evelyn, thank you for coming. I set down my bag, pulled out my laptop, and said nothing. Look, he began awkwardly, we realize now that you made your decision, I said calmly, opening my screen. I'm here to offer a service. Let's not pretend this is anything else. Across the table sat Johnny, his usual smirk replaced with a clenched jaw. His eyes didn't meet mine. He looked pale, sweaty, like a man who'd finally realized what he broke wasn't a system, it was his lifeline. Mari was there too, seated stiffly, pretending to study the corner of her notepad. She didn't say a word. I clicked open the consulting contract I'd drafted. With Ruth's help. It outlined every clause, payment terms, liability exclusions, confidentiality conditions, and, most importantly, non-transferable documentation rights. Everything I built remained mine, unless licensed back in writing. Roger skimmed it, jaw twitching, but he signed. Good, I said. Let's get to work. The systems were worse than I expected. They had attempted patches without understanding dependencies. Mari had rerouted an authentication token through a deprecated shell script, triggering recursive errors that shut down internal comms. Johnny had authorized a change to DNS routing that broke the connection between two of our largest client portals. They'd even tried resetting admin credentials, not realizing that without biometric pairing, the system considered them hostile users. I worked methodically, silently, watching as the room listened to me type like I was playing a symphony. At 1:34 p.m., internal dashboards came back online. At 2:10, client portals stabilized. At 2:42, the core vault accepted my override token and verified system integrity. By 3:00 p.m., the digital heart of Merotech was beating again, and they all knew whose hands brought it back. Roger returned with coffee. For me, a subtle shift, a quiet apology. But I didn't sip it. Instead, I pulled up a new document. This is what's going to happen now, I said, standing. I'll be here 3 days. During that time, I'll audit every system and document the processes. Those documents will be encrypted and hosted on a private cloud. You will receive view-only access. Johnny opened his mouth. Shouldn't we? No, I interrupted. You don't get root access. Not anymore. I clicked to the top of the page. Document access, granted expiration date, 72 hours. Author, E. Lane, contact for renewal. Required? I paused and looked around the room. You thought passwords were control? I said. You thought keys equaled ownership, but without knowledge, without context. They're just symbols. They don't make you powerful, they make you dependent. Silence. Mari finally raised her eyes. Her voice was small. So, we can't do this without you? I shrugged. Now you're asking the right question. I worked through the night remotely. By the end of the second day, I had restructured the entire access framework, stripped of the ego-driven junk they had tacked on. I trained 2 engineers from the original team who still understood the bones of the system, gave them limited overrides, offered them tools I never had as an employee. On the 3rd day, I packed my laptop, logged out of the admin portal, and submitted my final invoice. It totaled $13,500. They paid it within the hour. That Friday evening, I received a text from an unknown number. Evelyn, thank you. If you're open to returning full-time, we'd love to discuss a new offer. I stared at the screen. Then I deleted the message. Because I didn't want my old job back. I wanted respect, and they couldn't afford that. By Monday, the system hummed like it used to. Clean, quiet, obedient. The fires had been extinguished. Every client interface back online. Access keys restored, dependency loops corrected, legacy modules stabilized. The chaos I'd walked into just a week earlier was now a memory encoded in logs and buried in the silence of functioning code. But beneath the calm interface, the company itself was still hemorrhaging, just not in ways visible to the public. Outwardly, Merotech had survived. The stock price, which had dropped nearly 14% in the wake of the crash, had stabilized after the emergency press release titled System Recovery, led by former engineer. They never used my name, of course, just an experienced infrastructure consultant. But everyone internally knew. Investors were furious. Board meetings were held daily, one after another, behind sealed doors. Word leaked out in fragments. Shareholder pressure, external audits, accountability restructuring. You could practically smell the fear wafting from the executive floor, like burnt coffee and desperation. On Wednesday morning, the company Slack lit up with a quiet ping. E-channel. Please join us in wishing Johnny all the best in his future endeavors. No warning, no announcement, just gone. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. He'd been fired. Officially, it was a voluntary departure. But no one buys that when the guy who treated the infrastructure like a Lego set is suddenly scrubbed from the system like a virus. His keycard was disabled, his name removed from the org chart. The strategy decks he loved presenting were quietly moved to an archived folder titled Legacy Miss. By Thursday, Roger was next. A memo appeared in our inboxes from the board. Roger Winslow will be stepping down from his role as financial director, effective immediately. We thank him for his service and wish him success in his next chapter. I almost laughed. Stepping down was corporate code for, we finally read the damage reports. He had overseen the gutting of our operational integrity, undermined entire departments in the name of cost-cutting, enabled and empowered Johnny, Mari, and the others while dismissing red flags like they were typos. Now he was gone too. Just like that. No goodbye lunch, no LinkedIn post full of buzzwords, just deleted. That same day, I received a call from Ruth. "Check your inbox," she said, no greeting needed. "It's there." I opened the message from the board's legal office. Attached, a signed, notarized letter. The header was thick with weight, embossed with the Marotech crest. Formal acknowledgement of wrongful termination. Evelyn Lane. I read it 3 times. After a full internal review, we confirm that your dismissal on date did not follow internal protocol or employment law standards. Your refusal to perform unpaid labor and your warnings about technical risks were reasonable and justified under contract terms. The letter went on to detail everything Ruth had fought for. 6 months severance at full salary. 12 months of health benefits with COBRA premium coverage. Public credit for system design and architecture contributions. Amended HR records to reflect voluntary separation with distinction. There was even a formal apology from the board itself. I scrolled to the bottom. Your impact on Marotech's resilience and security was immeasurable. We thank you for your integrity. And below that, a 6-figure severance check, signed. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stared at the screen, letting the gravity of it settle. This was more than money, more than an apology. This was institutional proof that I wasn't the problem. They were. I had spent years defending a system they never respected, holding it together with grit and caffeine, while people like Johnny chased keywords. And when they discarded me, they assumed they'd discarded something replaceable. They were wrong. I came in one last time that Friday, unannounced. Security didn't stop me. In fact, Owen gave me a knowing nod and said, "They finally figured it out, huh?" "Something like that," I said, and stepped through the lobby one last time. I didn't go to the executive floor. Instead, I walked the long way, to the server room. It was cold as always. The soft hum of machines greeted me like old friends. I rested my palm on the access panel, just to feel the vibration underneath. The heartbeat of something I built. Something no one could fake. My system. My legacy. And finally, for the first time in a long while, not my responsibility anymore. As I walked back through the office, I passed the remnants of what had been Johnny's vision board, a wall now stripped of post-it notes and diagrams, half-erased whiteboards still stained with buzzwords. I passed Marie's desk. She was there, headphones in, eyes down. She didn't look up, and I passed the faces of the engineers who'd stayed, who'd watched the fall, who now knew the truth. Some of them nodded, some smiled, some whispered thank you as I passed. I didn't stop. There was nothing left for me to prove. They could run their company however they wanted, but now they'd have to do it without the comfort of pretending people like me didn't matter. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of red wine and my laptop closed beside me. I had no Slack notifications, no after-hours emails, no emergency pings, just silence. And for the first time, it didn't feel like neglect. It felt like freedom. The email came 3 weeks later. Subject line: from the new CEO, a personal request. I stared at it for a moment, then clicked it open, half expecting another vague apology buried under layers of corporate euphemism. But this one was different. It was from a woman named Delia Tran. I'd heard of her, an operational strategist brought in during major restructuring phases, known for cleaning up after other people's messes. No nonsense, smart, not a buzzword slinger like Roger, not a clueless mascot like Johnny. She got right to the point. Evelyn, I've reviewed your documentation and the audit trail from the recent failure. What you did was more than damage control. It was institutional preservation. I won't pretend we deserve your trust, but I am hoping to earn your partnership. We need help rebuilding the right way. Systems, teams, process knowledge. I'm requesting you return, not as staff, but as a remote consultant on your terms to help design the future. You'd be training a new team, defining the protocols, and advising the tech committee. No meetings you don't approve. No obligations beyond what you choose. Let's build something real this time. Delia. I sat back and stared out my window. I had told myself I was done, that I'd walk away and never look back, that they didn't deserve me. But the truth was, I cared. Not about the executives, not about the stock price or the spin or the branding. I cared about the system, about the people still working inside it, about the idea of building something resilient, something that didn't fall apart just because one person stepped out. That was what real engineering meant. Redundancy, sustainability, knowledge that outlives its authors. I replied that same afternoon. My return was quiet. No announcements, no internal memos, just a new profile in the system backend. E. Lane, external consultant. Delia and I met twice a week over encrypted video. She listened more than she spoke. She asked the right questions, and more importantly, didn't pretend to have all the answers. I started building again, but not infrastructure this time. People. I assembled a small team of sharp, underutilized engineers. Some were new hires, some survivors of the chaos. I trained them in layered architecture, documented fallback protocols, taught them how to spot weaknesses before they became faults. And this time, I didn't hoard the knowledge. I created a living manual, not a dry PDF, but an evolving internal wiki with real annotations, real stories, real logic behind every decision. I hosted open Q&As, walked them through failure analysis, encouraged dissent and curiosity. The system wasn't mine anymore, it was ours. As for Mari, she surprised me. Midway through the second month, she requested a one-on-one call. She didn't apologize, not directly, but she admitted she hadn't understood what she was part of. That flattery had been easier than asking questions, that she hadn't realized what it meant to be responsible for a system. I told her the truth. You don't have to be forgiven, just be better. She took the feedback. She kept showing up, and she got better. And Johnny? He resurfaced only once. Word leaked that he'd tried to apply for a lateral role at another firm using his Marotech recovery experience as a talking point. Delia intervened. Politely, professionally, but firmly. The industry was small, and incompetence, once exposed, echoes. One day, during a weekly advisory check-in, Delia shared a curious update. By the way, she said, half smiling, Rogers requested a transfer to an internal financial compliance role. Quiet, behind the scenes, no direct reports. Voluntary? I asked. Technically, she said. Unofficially? He sat through one debrief with you, referenced on every slide, and hasn't said a word since. I raised an eyebrow. She sipped her tea. Some men only realize they're out of their depth after nearly drowning an entire company. By the third month, the team no longer needed my daily input. The system lived, it learned, it adapted. And for the first time since this entire saga began, I didn't feel like the keystone holding everything up. I felt like a shadow behind the architecture, necessary, respected, optional. That's what I'd wanted all along, not power, not control. Legacy. I didn't realize how long I'd been holding my breath until I finally exhaled. Marotech was running smoothly. The new systems team didn't need constant supervision. My Slack notifications dropped from hourly pings to occasional thank you notes. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waking up at 4 a.m. in a cold sweat, thinking about authentication tokens and emergency patches. I was free, so I did something radical. I relaxed. It started with a small thing, ceramics. There was a little studio not far from my apartment that offered Tuesday evening classes. Nothing fancy, just a place where clay stuck under your fingernails and time didn't matter. I was terrible at it, at first. I shattered my first 3 bowls. My instructor gently suggested I stop trying to engineer symmetry into everything, but slowly, my hands remembered softness. And then, one afternoon, on the walk home, I passed a shelter window and locked eyes with a wide-eyed, smoke-colored cat pressing her face against the glass. Her name was Ash. I already had a lazy tabby named Comet. He'd been my silent sidekick through countless server downtimes. Now he had a sister. They didn't get along right away. Nothing ever does. But within a week, they were sharing the same patch of sunlight on my windowsill like old comrades. It was strange how quickly peace became possible. By the time spring rolled around, word had spread. Former clients who'd heard whispers of the Marotech incident, most of whom never got the full story, began reaching out. Heard you're consulting now? We're rethinking our infrastructure. Would love to bring you in. You're that Evelyn, right? The one who made the system freeze? The last one made me laugh. Yes, I was that Evelyn. Within a month, I had my own consulting practice. E-Lane Systems. No employees, no managers. Just me, 2 cats, a bulletproof contract template, and a quiet calendar I filled on my terms. I helped startups stabilize their backends, helped legacy companies understand what documentation really meant, and I charged exactly what I was worth. They didn't haggle. They couldn't afford to. One day, Delia pinged me just to share some news. We finalized the policy, calling it the protocol. I raised an eyebrow at the name. Employee protection? Exactly, she wrote. Mandatory compensation for off-hour work. Anonymous reporting channel. Whistleblower protection. Tech ownership defined clearly in contracts. Training standards. Hiring oversight. And then she added, it was inspired by what happened to you. We want to make sure it never happens again. I sat there for a long moment, not out of pride, but because it hit me all at once. Something good had come from all that wreckage. Not just the systems, not just the reform, but a culture shift. One where people like me weren't just quietly depended on. They were protected. I don't tell the full story often, but every once in a while, I hear it secondhand. A junior admin quoting Evelyn Lane's lockdown failsafe, like it's tech folklore. A conference speaker referencing the Marotech incident with awe and a trace of fear. A blog post about how one woman's refusal to work for free reshaped a company's entire operational model. They don't know the whole story, but they know enough. Enough to know that integrity matters. That knowledge is power. That systems reflect the people who build them. And when those people are ignored, the whole thing can fall. I still walk past the old office sometimes. Not out of nostalgia, out of clarity. Because I survived it. And because I didn't just survive. I rewrote the story they tried to pin on me. And now, every morning, as the sunlight hits my windowsill and 2 cats stretch lazily in its warmth, I pour my coffee, sit by my laptop, and write systems designed to outlast me. Not because I have to, because I choose to, and that in the end was always the point.